Poetry is angst, defiance, a world where dreamers dare to talk of what is yet to come, what should be and what appalls. Poets love the world they live in so much that they dare to be angry at its ravage. Speaking out loud and clear with no fear, Akhil Katyal, Irom Sharmila, Karuna Ezara Parikh, Meena, Kandasamy, and Uday Prakash, for words when spoken with conviction carry their own courage and energy. The poets shall all be reading from their works, and as a special gesture and act of solidarity, Ms. Irom Sharmila will be reading the powerful words of Sri Varavara Rao in support of his spirit and life work.
What is it that poets have achieved since time immemorial? Except revealing some fantastic falsehood or covering truth in symbolism, so as not to hurt the unjust. Whether it was appreciation or disapproval, admonition or blessing, it was an inability all the way to taste like salt, to generate heat like fire, to spread air like trees, to pour rain like water. Militancy turned in rhetoric, fearlessness to foolishness, poetry as eccentricity of no concern to anybody. But has any poet lived like a turbulence attracting the attention of others, like a deluge of blood in the veins, like a shock that wakes up the heart, like a path breaker? The search in poetry is not with a torch, but the poet has to become a shovel to blast the darkness that invisibly spreads in life. The poet has to be a light that calls out voices from the well. Poetry is not just a message. There is no escape by pleading that it was just poetry. Poetry is hope in the eyes of human beings. It is compassion in the eyes of human beings. There is no self-deception greater than separating poetry and life. If a poet is one who expresses fabulously on paper alone, life would be better than a poet. Varavara Rao's poem titled The Truth. The truth that a worker's sweat can never utter. The truth that his empty stomach can never utter. The truth that his tears can never utter. The truth that his toiling fist can never utter. Can a drop of ink from a poet's pen express it? Varavara Rao's poem called Intellectual. The tree holds the leaf up in the sky only to supply food to the roots deep in the earth. It adorns flowers in its green crown so that there are fruits turning ripe that drop down to the ground and turn to seed again. If crime itself assumes authority and power and hunts down people, holding them as criminals, everyone endowed with a mouth who remains silent becomes a criminal themselves. Varavara Rao's poem called Reflection. I did not supply the explosives, nor ideas for that matter. It was you who trod upon the anthill with iron heels, and from that trampled earth, vengeance was born. It was you who struck the beehive with your lathi, scattered bees exploding against your second visage. Blotched red in fear, when the victory drums started beating in the heart of the masses, you mistook death for an individual and trained your guns. Revolution reverberated from the four horizons. Varavara Rao's poem titled Corpse of Battle. Carrying the dead body from lockup on my back, I began walking. I will let you know the episodes of my death. Solve the riddle, was it a natural death or murder, said the corpse. If a dead body, dead too from lockup speaks, that must be a murder, I said. Despite being happy as I told the truth, the corpse vanished to be reborn in another lockup, as it was crime for a living man to speak. Varavara Rao's poem, titled The Death of a Human, the last one. The death of a human unsettles me. Call him a martyr or say that he turned into a star. Humanity is gagged. Nevertheless, when a human dies, no one knows where he comes from. No one knows his name, and there is no one he is related to, but the murderers knows that well. The one who dies is human. The tree that sprinkles flowers in the form of tears knows his name. Had I seen his face in any photo, I wouldn't even recognize him. But when I know that he is human too, how can I not be related to him? Thank you. As my friend suggested, I will read out my short poem that also the title of the poem, poetry book, Fragrance of Peace, in my mother tongue. I will read. Punsi chengjel na loiraba kal, thawai yaudraba polang se, Kabru ipagi laisha thakta thinbiyu nakhoi mayamna. Siraba aigi haksangbu mairakta tangoi onkhinaba singjangna yotpakna yankhaibadi pungning aitadi hangoi jai. Kangbanaiba kurangban se mairak mainungda lainungda patsa pumjasnu khanigi pothok oihausnu mathangi mirolda chanasnu. Santi gi lainam yelakkene Kanglai aigi ihau phamdagi juk juk khudingda malemgi mafam thungnanaba. In short, it was somewhat based on my livelihood of dying at any time when just around half an year beginning stage of my struggle, I wrote it as a song without titling and naming anything without naming. They give that fragrance of peace, they name it. And in the poem, I asked people surrounding me, in case of my death, to escort it to our sacred holy hill, Kaubru, on its soil to bury it. In the next paragraph, I express my feeling of my revulsion of cutting into pieces of my dead body's bones. I just expressed that And so instead of that, in the third I say, uh, uh, I forgot that. Or it would be the last, that my dead bodies burying thing would spread peace throughout the world.
So this is a session about poems of protest and raising our voices. And long before I understood about rights, as a woman, I understood about being violated and about feeling violated. And I think most women in this room will understand what I'm speaking about. It's a sense of something. So my first poems, when I started writing poems of protest, and I started raising my voice through my words, were poems about this, far before I realized that these too were political poems. So I'm going to start by reading one of them. Tell me the real statistics. No, tell me, how many men are doing the raping? Tell me, when will you stop forgiving our fathers, uncles, brothers, lovers, friends, sons, what you have held against the other ones? Tell me about that time someone passing by on a bike stroked your proud, bare summer calf in the rickshaw, cutting your laughter to gasp, and you told the sweet boy by you, and he said, "Are you sure?" And you were suddenly not sure. That uncle, that tuition's master under the dining table, with the same hand he drank chai in your mother's china, and there were biscuit crumbs inside you later. It was how you discovered you had an inside. That date, you had said, "I'd rather not." And later you had said, "Fuck it, ab kya?" Later you could not understand if it warranted a Me Too status or not. You still don't know, so it's best not to. You stay up late wondering if your silence affects statistics, if you are a statistic. That sweet cook who sent your niece pictures of dogs fucking, you remember? She was a feisty girl. She had said, "You know, he calls me sometimes late at night." She was 12. Everyone told her to shut up with her stories. It reminded you of that time you were 3 and you thought his wetness on your hand was your fault. Maybe this is how we become storytellers. Thank you. The next poem I want to read is called Write About What Hurts, and it is very much a direct political poem. I want to actually read a short section from the notes of my book, giving context to this poem so that it makes a little more sense. So this poem was written in response to the Indian government's plans for the Central Vista project, which I'm sure you are all familiar with in Delhi, which will see the demolishment of the National Museum and the annex to the National Archives of India. The latter is a historical treasure trove of 45 lakh files, including 25,000 rare manuscripts, more than 1 lakh Mughal documents, 1 lakh maps, and 6 lakh post-partition era documents. What's very worrying is that the government remains very vague on the subject of how they're going to store these priceless documents and this material that's contained within both these buildings. The museum contains the Buddhist relics and our famed Harappan dancing girl, which I'm sure you all remember from our history textbooks. The project's the project will also see the demolition of the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, that as well. And this poem references when this Center for the Arts was launched, and that was in 1985, and it was at a ceremony where sorry. So when the Indira Gandhi Center for the Arts was launched, it was launched in 1985 at a ceremony where 5 rocks from 5 different Indian rivers, the Indus, the Ganga, the Kaveri, the Mahanadi and the Narmada, were brought to Delhi. And the foundation stone was laid within an ancient deodar tree, and then 5 other trees, the sacred fig, the bodhi, the banyan, the ashoka, the arjuna and the kadamba, were planted at this site, which will no longer exist. It will make way for 10 new office buildings. And most heartbreakingly, this was at the time the book went into publishing, the Central Vista project would most likely have seen the felling of an avenue's worth of century-old jamun trees. An old prophecy about the 7 cities of Delhi that's been oft quoted in this time goes, whoever builds a new city in Delhi will lose it. And ironically, this poem that I'm about to read was completed the day a different government refurbishment was inaugurated, the new Jallianwala Bagh Memorial. So now that I've given you some context about it, I'll read the poem out. It's called Write About What Hurts. Let us write of anything but the jamun trees, anything but the speaking network of root, and how squirrels have nested in its breast, tendering for hundreds of years their stripes upon furred, sure-footed children. Let us not speak now of the letter once handwritten and kept, informing of Mangal Pandey's death, or access that memory of a boy you once loved, taking your dove hand to his on the damp grass where grown men lightly blew rainbowed soap bubbles as slippery and fast, disappearing as our oil. What of the time you held the idea of nation dear, suddenly a cricket fan, suddenly waving a flag under the stout arch of India Gate, because in victory we all want to belong. Remember your 31st birthday, Madras checked sari. You were a step from discovery that year, and when they asked, where do you want to go tonight, you said, take me there to the very throat of the city, that cross point where oxygen enters its lungs vitally, where taste becomes sustenance. Let's talk of anything but the arts and the 5 stones that were brought from 5 rivers to inaugurate again our deep love of them. What of the 5 trees or the sleeping deodar? No, let us not, because there were 7 cities, like 7 brides for 7 emperors, and here is the 8th and there is the 9th, peeking like a dark dawn over sandstone hills, where we will not talk of how we spent summer nights as children, dewed and cool as ice cream, enlivened as protest song. A lolly stick and a lathi are both made of wood after all. But let us talk of nothing that reminds us of the jamuns. Tell me instead how many times you can say the word beloved. Back when the bijli went for hours in our homes across this great 8th city, we would gather like moths to the tungsten. Someone was always playing Krishna's flute, pinwheels framed the stars. Where do we now go for lightness? But let us not write of erosions, of the many bags we should have watered and kept safe. It is late. Come, let the old jamuns sleep.
Do you have time? One more, 2 more? Yeah, 2 more? Okay.
I'm going to read 2 more. They're short-ish. One is, we just celebrated 75 years of Indian independence. And for some reason this year, with all the news about Bilkis Bano, about a 9-year-old Dalit boy who died that day for being beaten to death by a teacher for drinking water from a school well, with all that news, it felt like a day of resistance rather than one of celebration. And I'd written a poem last year called Hearing Jan Gan Man precisely mid-August, and I'm going to read that out. Coming in on the end of Shravan, somewhere in the close distance, across the almost autumn park, I hear Jaya He, Jaya He. My heart stands up, I try to swallow it, but it is so swollen with sudden identity, I feel cheap, like aching for a lover because of Julia Roberts. I may as well brandish a satin tiranga and call it silk. Aren't I better than a fucking patriot? Aren't I more than a heartstring pulled ferociously by song, by bloody anthem? I am collapsing against myself and the hard memory handed down ancestrally, blood to blood, so to speak, of battles fought, of country uncut, of freedom and trysts with what was meant to be ours. When were we last proud in the now, without anthem or flag, bringing pride and then downfall, bringing forth sorrow like a wound, like the parting of earth, like skin? Before, in a village in Gujarat, my grandfather's neighbor used to call out to him, offering biryani with saffron and succulent meat each Eid. I talked to the dead and I asked this strict vegetarian ancestor, Dada, how did you eat it? He laughs and he won't tell me. Instead, he tells me how they played cricket between unpartitioned courtyards, him and his neighbor Akbar Ali. Technically, he is still our neighbor, he says in my dreams. Today, both sides say, the ball's in your court, confusing stuff when the game is bluff. And I'm going to read one last poem. It's a sad poem. It was when I was experimenting with more Sufi styles as well. But I also think of it as a poem of a gentle sort of hope. I find the rituals of religion, their stories and secrets, so beautiful, like small doorways to the divine. Who was the first person to say, the doorways to my home are better than yours, more beautiful and ornate, larger, more intricate? And how come they didn't say instead, come friend, you take your doorway and I will take mine. I cannot wait to see you on the other side. We will meet in the same place, in the courtyard with the unending sky, in the lap of the divine, and discuss our journeys over a shared cup of wine.
Here it's written that I am the voice of Hindi. So I have to read my poems, 2 or 3 very small poems. And I don't know how can any poet represent any language. A poet represents his own conscience. And solidarity goes here, that a poet must stand with another poet. And this solidarity is there. And we knew Varavara Rao. My age is quite beyond 70, 71 plus. तो हिंदी के लिए वो बहुत अपरिचित नहीं है और हिंदी काफ़ी ऐसी बड़ी भाषा है। तो श्री श्री वरवरा राव और आरिकपुड़ी एक पूरा मूवमेंट था और उस मूवमेंट के बाद दूसरा आया जब ये लैंड रिफॉर्म्स और कॉन्ट्रडिक्शंस को लेकर के आंदोलन शुरू हुए। तो मेरा ये कहना है कि वरवरा राव एक कवि ही थे, अ पोएट, या हैं विद ए कॉन्शियंस ऑफ ए पोएट, और जिसने इतने वर्षों तक इतनी डिसिप्लिन्स में, इतनी नौकरियों में अनुशासन के साथ काम किया हो. हाउ कम सडनली state decides to punish him? So the old age and solidarity goes here. So I'm going to read few very small poems. And as far as the protest and resistance is concerned, I don't think any poet can protest. It's a resistance. A poet has such a strong antenna, like वो घाघ भड्री को आपने पढ़ा होगा, गांव में पढ़ते हैं कि वो चींटियाँ होती हैं, वो तितलियाँ होती हैं, जो आने वाले मौसम को, बारिश को, तूफान को सबसे पहले जानती हैं। एक चींटी, एक तितली पंख फड़फड़ाती है और कहीं पर टॉर्नेडो आ रहा होता है। चींटियां जब अपने बिल से निकल के अंडे ले लेकर के भागने लगती हैं, बारिश होने वाली होती है। तो कवि जो होता है वो बिल्कुल लाइक एन एंट, लाइक ए बटरफ्लाई, तो वार्न करता है, वो समझाता है। अगर आप उसको समझ लें तो मैंने एक बहुत पहले, व्हेन आई वाज आई थिंक 23 या 22 or 23, I wrote a poem on Vasant, spring. And I don't know, spring is always related with some kind of a change. तो वो कविता बहुत छोटी है, 3 या 4 पंक्तियों की है कि दुनिया अपनी तरह से बदलती है. It's a kind of, we think that we are going to change it or we are going to infringe somewhere, but it goes. तो कविता ऐसी है, सुन लें आप इसको. बसंत. रेलगाड़ी आती है और चली जाती है. रेलगाड़ी आती है और चली जाती है. जंगल में पलाश का एक गार्ड लाल झंडियां दिखाता रह जाता है. So it's a power fire. कोई नहीं सुनता, कोई नहीं देखता. Warning of a nature, warning of a poet. If people start listening it, I think we can save. So this is my celebrity. I haven't met him, never, because I hardly meet people. A poet remains a person with poetic self. Hardly meets anyone. I was telling to one poet over here that I prefer to eat alone, sit alone, and be away as possible from the crowd and from mela and celebrations. So how a poet could be celebrated? But of course, in these dark days of his life, I'm not talking about the political scenario at all. I'm not a political person. My solidarity goes with a poet, and being a poet, and also his voice of Hindi, where I'm not considered as a Hindi poet properly. You take any official list of any political party, you won't find us. तो मैं दूसरी कविता सुनाता हूँ, और छोटी छोटी, और ये मुझे सौरभ ने कहा कि आप इसको ज़रूर पढ़िएगा. तो ये कविता पहली कविता है जिसको कोई अवार्ड मिला, और यह है तिब्बत. इस कविता को भी समझा नहीं गया, अब समझा जा रहा है, और हम सब कहीं ना कहीं डिस्प्लेस्ड हैं. तिब्बत. तिब्बत से आए हुए लामा घूमते रहते हैं आजकल मंत्र बुदबुदाते. तिब्बत से आए हुए लामा घूमते रहते हैं आजकल मंत्र बुदबुदाते. उनके खच्चरों के झुंड बगीचों में उतरते हैं, गेंदे के पौधों को नहीं चरते. गेंदे के एक फूल में कितने फूल होते हैं पापा? तिब्बत में बरसात जब होती है तब हम किस मौसम में होते हैं? तिब्बत में जब 3 बजते हैं तब हम किस समय में होते हैं? तिब्बत में गेंदे के फूल होते हैं क्या पापा? पापा, लामा शंख बजाते हैं? पापा, लामाओं को कंबल ओढ़कर अंधेरे में तेज तेज चलते हुए देखा है कभी? जब लोग मर जाते हैं तब उनकी कब्रों के चारों ओर सिर झुकाकर खड़े हो जाते हैं लामा. वे मंत्र नहीं पढ़ते, वे फुसफुसाते हैं, तिब्बत 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 तिब्बत, और रोते रहते हैं रात रात भर. क्या लामा हमारी तरह ही रोते हैं पापा? एक कविता है ये बहुत, ये भी बहुत पुरानी है और ये इसको सुने। हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना, हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना, हमी चदरिया हमी जुलाहा, हमी गजी हम थाना, हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना। नाद हमी अनुनाद हमी, निशब्द हमी गंभीरा, नाद हमी अनुनाद हमी, निशब्द हमी गंभीरा, अंधकार हम चांद सूरज हम कान्हा हम मीरा, हम ही अकेले हम ही दुकेले, हम चुग्गा हम दाना, हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना। मंदिर मस्जिद हम गुरुद्वारा, हम मठ हम बैरागी, मंदिर मस्जिद हम गुरुद्वारा, हम मठ हम बैरागी, हम ही पुजारी हम ही देवता, हम कीर्तन हम रागी, आखत रोली अलख भभूति, रूप धरे हम नाना, हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना। मूल फूल हम रुत बादल हम माटी हम पानी, मूल फूल हम रुत बादल हम माटी हम पानी, हम ही यहूदी शेख बिरहमन हरिजन हम ख्रिस्तानी, पीर अघोरी सिद्ध औलिया, हम ही पेट हम खाना, हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना। नाम पता न ठौर ठिकाना, जात धर्म ना कोई, मुलक खलक राजा प्रजा हम बेसन हम लोई, हम ही दुल्हा हम ही बराती, हम फूंका हम छाना, हम हैं ताना हम हैं बाना।
Can we have another round of applause for Uday ji, for Irom and for Karuna? Some of you would have heard in May this year, the Allahabad High Court dismissed one petition which wanted to open the 22 basement rooms of the Taj Mahal. They dismissed the petition. They did not form the committee to study and publish the real history of Taj Mahal, which this petition wanted. They refused to enter this controversy, which was conjured out of thin air to put into jeopardy this wonder of the world. They called it a non-justiciable issue. It's an issue which cannot be brought to trial, and asked us to leave it to the historians. Keeping that moment in mind, I'll just read one long poem called A Saint Came to Die in Our Land. I keep telling G I will peak at 40. He doesn't believe me. In the afternoon, we leave the marble tomb behind us. It's white, blistering in the sun. G says, "Can you stop the sun for me?" My father notes down his favorite couplets in a notebook smaller than my palm. He would have copied out G's line. All of childhood, we were told there will be a school trip to the marble tomb. It never happened. But we did not learn to not look for peaks in the small orbit of our lives. As kids, we knew that wonder lay under that white dome. Our plans were made of outside food, living next door, trump cards, and claims made in little corridors. The first time I saw the marble tomb, years later, a friend drove us. I did not believe there could be such a white in the world. We asked the guide to explain it. Kefi said, "दूध की नहर में जिस तरह उबाल आ जाए." The murmur translated as if a stream of milk had suddenly come to a boil. When I said I will peak at 40, I meant to abdicate the failures of so far, to auger my way to where the railway tracks meet In the cab, the breeze fills up our mass while I hold the future to ransom. I keep telling G, I will peak at that age far enough to make seesaw promises about. He replies, like a general negotiating terms of surrender, as if his sound was its own meaning, needing no separate passing or prophecy. Some sounds need no parsing. They are their own prophecy. The year Bismillah Khan died, I was in Malka Ganj sitting under the clock tower. In the crowd, I could not distinguish the passing of an age. In every palm, they held large crescents of jaggery, martabans of trapped songs, and a piece of an irreversible world. When G left, it was that 2 score again. The future is always more reliable than what we hold in our inept hands. I wish I hadn't made claims he could keep in his pocket and leave. There are so many kinds of leavings, some which can flower an entire people in another land, where slowly the fingers of their arrival grow and their jasper hearts, and some which leave a rock of silence in their wake. Once, a friend told me about a saint who walked many hundreds of miles to come and die in the town where I was born, only so that people may make wishes by the edge of his tomb, tie threads on a window trellised with wishes. In each twist, a promised son or daughter, a lover's return, a pay rise, or an early death of an abhorrent in-law. When he passed, he'd already done the penance, sung the dirge, and performed the miracle that made this fallow piece of land the darbar of an eccentric and generous king, who could grant you anything if only you opened your hands in a surrender underwritten by faith. His resting place yielded desires like a desert, each shrub a promise of water. By his head lay a granite mortar filled with salt that once tasted could cure all illnesses. When my people came, G did not say, your people. Axe in hand to demolish this shrine, they knew that behind their thirst was the girder of a common silence. They want to open the basement rooms of the marble tomb. They say they will find our gods. I don't want anything to do with the gods for whom the dead have to be disturbed. Will the Firoza in our eyes outlive the animus of our hands? I don't want anything to do with the gods for whom they stalk the street. Will the Suleimani in our hands survive the Haneri of their eyes? They are still your gods, whether you like them or not. The guide told us nothing of how the stone turns into papier-mâché. You cannot go on abdicating gods like this, not owning up to their failures. In the notebook smaller than my palm, my father notes down a line of sight that goes straight to the finial. We peak together if some of us are not thrown down, if some of us do not learn. Not every discovery is a form of growing. Manucci tells me, in the foundations of my city were ordered the several decapitated criminals to be placed as a sign of sacrifice. Doubt the motivations of those who go looking for gods with a shovel. To let the dead sleep is a learned art. To become literate in living next door. Own up to the gods you were born to. Don't mitigate the image of their poison. Find antidotes to their sting. In front of you, a people are being turned into a foil. No use telling them you don't believe in the gods stitched to your name. We will have no one to give this world to, no one except the river to carry our dead. We don't peak in a manipulable future of dawns. We have no beginnings like the day's first prayers. We will only dig the ground and find what we already know, our animus made into a god. When you left, G, I asked every part of my city to yield all its memories, entered them in a register so that no one would say they weren't there. In Ankahi, made before I was born, the little boy with a hole in his heart speaks only in aphorisms. बाजी, आप जिंदगी को क्या समझती हैं? जिब्रान कहता है जिंदगी मिलने और फिर जुदा हो जाने और फिर मिल जाने के अमल को कहते हैं. With a shovel, I thought I could go looking for assurance of having been loved. The previous generation is too eager to pass this world into our hands. They make it sound like a gift. To let go of the past is a learned art. To not go digging for something only to plot its spurious return. To understand the passing of an age allows us to live in the coral of the present. Every ground is sacred. We must not turn God into evidence. We should not sieve the dust of Jamuna for anklets. My people must not look for a sleeping God under the doorsteps of the living. We should not claim as our own every stone we touch. There is God within the rooms of our miserable hearts. We should not seek him in the agate of our neighbor's sleep. Thank you.